I paid for every single detail of my daughter's wedding. The dress, the flowers, even the hall itself. Yet, when I walked through the door, she looked me in the eyes and said, "Dad, you're not invited. Leave." My heart shattered, but I stayed calm. What she didn't know was that I still held the strings of her perfect day, and with one call, everything began to unravel. I remember the way the chandeliers glittered that afternoon, like 1,000 watchful eyes staring down at me. The Brown Palace Hotel was buzzing with the kind of elegance that never belonged to me. My boots clicked against the marble in a rhythm that felt wrong in that place, like a hammer tapping in a symphony. I had the gift box in my hand, wrapped with my own clumsy fingers the night before, because I thought every father should bring something when his daughter gets married. I didn't even make it past the doorway. Ashley stood there in her white silk gown, her hand gripping Nathan's arm like a lifeline. For a split second, I saw the little girl who once begged me to push her higher on the swing at Riverside Park. Then her lips parted, and the words cut deeper than any saw I'd ever handled. "Dad, you weren't invited. Please leave." The world didn't spin. It froze. Guests turned their heads, pearls gleaming, cufflinks catching the light. A few whispers rose, hushed laughter hidden behind champagne glasses. My throat tightened, but no sound came out. I had worked 2 overtime jobs the year her braces went on. I had poured concrete until midnight so she could have the college fund her mother once dreamed of. I had signed every check for this very wedding, and now I was nothing but a stain on her perfect white carpet. Nathan straightened his jacket and spoke like a lawyer addressing a courtroom. "Mr. Miller, this is a private family celebration. Immediate family only." His voice was smooth, polished, rehearsed. The kind of voice that had never scraped calluses on a job site. I glanced at Ashley, praying for a flicker of hesitation, a crack in her mask. Instead, her eyes darted to the crowd behind her. The Bennett's friends, the senators, the bankers, the kind of people who only noticed you if your name was on a donor wall. She looked back at me and whispered, "It's about fitting in, Dad." "You don't understand." I understood plenty. I understood that I had been good enough to pay for the orchids from Ecuador, good enough to foot the catering bill, good enough to rent the grand ballroom, but not good enough to sit at a table inside it. The gift box trembled in my hand. I wanted to place it in hers. I wanted her to see the small golden locket inside, Sarah's locket, her mother's, but her words had built a wall between us so high I couldn't see the top. My fingers unclenched, and I set the box down on a nearby table among untouched flutes of champagne. "You're right," I said quietly. "I don't belong here." The silence that followed was louder than any argument. I could hear my own breath echo against the marble. My walk to the exit stretched forever, each step heavier than the last. Every whisper behind me a knife in the back. A woman laughed, sharp and artificial, and it sounded like judgment itself. Outside, the spring air hit me in the chest. I stood for a moment under the ornate hotel awning, staring at the line of black cars, BMWs, Teslas, a Bentley with a driver in a cap. My truck sat at the far end of the lot, dusty blue, the paint scratched from years of hauling lumber. That's where I belonged. My heart should have been shattered. Instead, I felt something steadier take its place. I wasn't going to fight for a seat at a table where I was already unwelcome. I wasn't going to beg to stay in a room I paid for yet wasn't allowed to enter. I gripped my phone, the screen lighting up with missed calls from my lawyer about a property dispute, messages I hadn't bothered to answer. Tonight, I would call a different number. Tonight, I would remind myself that a man who built something from nothing could also take it back to nothing. As I walked across the asphalt toward my truck, I looked once more at the golden glow spilling from the ballroom windows. Inside, they toasted to a future built on my back. Outside, I was preparing to show them what life looked like when the back they stood on decided to stand up straight. The keys jingled in my palm as the wind picked up, carrying the first scent of rain. My daughter's laughter floated faintly through the glass, light and careless. But in my chest another sound began to rise low, steady, determined. The sound of a man who had been dismissed from his own family's celebration, and who was about to make sure that celebration would not last long. I opened the truck door, sat down, and closed it with finality. The leather notebook with account numbers lay on the passenger seat. For the first time in years I felt no doubt, no hesitation. The night would not end the way they thought it would. The chandeliers behind me sparkled on without me, but I had just lit a different kind of fire. The air outside was colder than I expected. It hit my lungs sharp, like waking from a bad dream. I stood for a moment at the edge of the valet circle, letting the door close behind me with a heavy thud. The muffled music from inside bled through the glass, violins and chatter that no longer belonged to me. A line of luxury cars glittered beneath the streetlights, shiny black SUVs with chauffeurs waiting, a Bentley polished so bright it looked like liquid. My truck sat in the far corner of the lot, alone, a faded blue Ford with scratches that told the truth of who I was. I had waxed it that morning, thinking it might help me fit in. The shine was already dulled by dust. I walked slowly, the marble under my boots giving way to asphalt. My polished work boots felt heavier with every step. They were clean, but they were still work boots, and I realized that was exactly the problem for her. I remembered Ashley's voice from last Christmas, whispering that maybe I could wear something nicer than boots when visiting Nathan's family. I had laughed it off then, but now I understood. Each car I passed seemed to mock me. German engineering, custom plates, tinted windows. I saw my reflection in the sleek curve of a Mercedes hood, gray hair at the temples, deep lines from years in the sun, a man who built things with his hands. Not the kind of father Ashley wanted to introduce to senators and bankers. I clenched my fists and kept walking. The spring wind carried the faint perfume of orchids mixed with the smell of gasoline. I thought about the little girl who used to ride on my shoulders, her hair smelling of crayons and peanut butter. She would have clapped when she saw the flowers inside, would have hugged me for bringing them home. Now she walked past those same flowers without even looking, pretending they had grown out of the marble floor for her alone. By the time I reached the edge of the lot, my chest ached. Not from the walk, but from the weight of years pressing down all at once. The sacrifices came back in flashes. Signing the tuition check when I had only half the payroll covered. Buying her braces instead of fixing the roof. Working double shifts so she could drive something better than the cars her classmates mocked. I had done it gladly every time. I had thought love was measured in how much you could give. I stopped beside my truck and set my hand on the door handle. The metal was cool and familiar. Inside that ballroom, she was becoming someone else's daughter. Out here, I was still her father, but only in memory. I pulled out my phone, the glow lighting up my tired face. Missed calls from my lawyer blinked across the screen. Property dispute, city permits, all things that could wait. My thumb hovered over another number saved months ago, one I had never thought I would need tonight. The number for the bank's business services line. I closed my eyes and took a breath. For the first time in years, I felt the edge of freedom. Not joy, not yet, but the freedom that comes when you stop begging to belong. I knew what had to be done. The music from the ballroom drifted faintly across the parking lot. A cheer rose, maybe for the couple's entrance. It was followed by laughter, high and smooth. I imagined Ashley smiling, radiant in that dress, while I stood outside in the dark. She would never know what that dress had cost me, not just in dollars, but in nights spent aching, back bent over rebar and cement, hands cracked and bleeding in winter cold. I slid into the driver's seat and closed the door. The cab wrapped around me with silence. For the first time that day, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. No chandeliers, no whispers, no stage. Just me, my truck, and the steady hum of a man who finally understood his place. I rested my hands on the wheel. Through the windshield, the hotel shimmered with golden light, tall windows framing a world I had built but wasn't allowed to enter. My heart no longer begged for a seat inside. It began to steady itself for something else entirely. The clock on the dash glowed 3:47. Bank hours were slipping away. I reached for the leather notebook lying on the passenger seat. Every number I had ever needed, every account, every authorization code, written by my own hand. For 25 years I had carried her weight without question. Tonight I would decide what I carried and what I set down. The wind rattled the branches overhead as clouds began to gather. My phone buzzed once, then stilled. I didn't answer. I looked at the hotel one last time, the laughter leaking through glass walls, and I whispered to myself, I don't belong in there, but they don't know yet how much of that room still belongs to me. I sat there in the cab, staring at the dash clock, glowing 3:47. The second hand seemed to taunt me, ticking toward closing time. My fingers tapped on the steering wheel, not out of nerves, but out of calculation. 25 years of running Miller Build Co. had taught me one thing. Timing was everything. You pour concrete too soon and it cracks. You pour too late and it never sets. This moment was exactly the same. I flipped open the worn leather notebook on the passenger seat. Pages filled with account numbers, contract codes, small notes in my handwriting. I had carried that book through every job site, every deal, every bank meeting. Tonight it was the difference between being walked on and standing up. I scrolled through my phone contacts until I found the number I needed, Rocky Mountain Bank Business Services. My thumb hesitated for only a breath, then pressed call. The line rang once, twice. Then a bright female voice answered. Rocky Mountain Bank, this is Patricia. How may I help you? Her tone was cheerful, unaware she was about to witness the end of a wedding. Patricia, this is Robert Miller, account number 774920. I need to initiate immediate stop payments on several authorized transactions. My voice was steady, professional, the same tone I used in boardrooms and contract disputes. Of course, Mr. Miller, let me verify your information first. May I have your social security and your mother's maiden name? She asked politely. I recited them without looking at the paper. Numbers had been my tools as much as steel beams and cement mixers. She confirmed quickly. Thank you. Now, which transactions would you like to stop? I glanced out the windshield at the Golden Hotel windows. Inside, Ashley was smiling for cameras, toasting to a future paid in full by the man she had dismissed. I breathed deep and said the words like a list I had rehearsed. Venue rental, catering deposit, floral arrangements, photography, music services, linen rental, all connected to the Bennett Miller wedding today. There was a pause on the other end. The kind of silence that means the weight of a request has just landed. Sir, these are significant amounts. Are you certain about stopping all payments? Completely certain, I said. My eyes stayed locked on the ballroom windows. There has been a change in circumstances. I heard the clacking of her keyboard, fast and precise. I will need authorization codes for any transactions over 10,000. I didn't even open the notebook. I knew them by heart. 25 years of protecting my business taught me never to trust memory cards or assistants for the most important details. I spoke each code slowly, and Patricia repeated them back. Stop payments are now in effect, she finally said. Confirmation numbers are being generated. Would you like them sent to your secure email? Yes, and fax a copy to Chen and Walters LLP. They handle my legal matters. Understood. Her tone had changed slightly. Professional, but cautious. She knew she had just pulled the plug on a very expensive event. Is there anything else I can assist you with today, Mr. Miller? I almost laughed at the normality of the question. Anything else? She had no idea. That covers the banking side, Patricia. Thank you for your efficiency. I ended the call and set the phone on the console. My reflection in the dark screen looked calmer than I felt. Behind those windows, the string quartet still played. Guests raised glasses filled with champagne I had purchased, but the music and the laughter were already living on borrowed time. I leaned back in the seat and closed my eyes. For the first time since Ashley's words at the doorway, I felt my chest loosen. I had not shouted. I had not begged. I had simply drawn a line with the only language they understood. Money. Outside, the wind picked up. Clouds gathered heavy and gray over Denver's skyline. I watched as the valet jogged to retrieve another luxury car for some late-arriving guest. None of them knew that the foundation beneath their celebration had just cracked. They thought the night was theirs. What they did not see was the man in the far corner of the lot, in a dusty blue truck, who had just reminded them who really paid for every sparkling detail. I picked up my phone again, scrolling through contacts. The bank was only the first call. There were others waiting, vendors who would need to know immediately. I rubbed my thumb over the cracked leather of my notebook. Each number in there was another truth, another thread I could pull. The unraveling had already begun. The clock read 3:58, 2 minutes until the bank closed, just enough time to take one more breath and prepare for what came next. I rested my hand on the wheel and whispered to myself, steady and certain, "This is not revenge. This is business." Then I started the truck. The engine hummed low like a man clearing his throat before speaking the truth. The truck engine idled as I sat there, the glow of the ballroom windows shining across the parking lot. My phone rested on the console, screen dark, but I could still hear Patricia's voice in my ear. Stop payments are now in effect. It was done. The money flow had been cut, and all that was left was gravity pulling the rest down. It didn't take long. I saw the first van roll up not 20 minutes later, white paint with bold lettering across the side. Summit Catering. The same company Ashley had insisted on because their menu was what Nathan's family is used to. The back doors swung open and 3 staff members stepped out. Their faces were tight, no trace of the polite smiles they wore earlier in the day. One carried a clipboard, the others rolled out empty Cambros and metal carts. They didn't even look toward the main entrance. They went straight for the service door like soldiers who knew their orders. I leaned back in my seat, watching through the windshield as the quiet unraveling began. The ballroom still glowed, music floated out faintly, laughter rose in waves. But in the shadows of the loading dock another story was unfolding. A second van pulled up moments later, smaller, painted with green vines curling around elegant letters, mile-high florals. The florist Ashley had begged for, the one who imported orchids from Ecuador and promised to make the room look like a royal garden. The woman driving stepped out with 2 assistants. Their arms were filled not with flowers but with plastic tubs and packing wrap. They didn't pause to admire their own work. They went inside briskly, as if every second mattered. I pictured the moment when the first centerpiece would be lifted. Guests pausing mid-conversation, a hand reaching to stop them. The polite but firm reply. Payment authorization was revoked. Property must be retrieved. Business is business. The music from the string quartet wavered faintly, as if sensing the change. I knew the techs would be next. It takes only one call from the bank for them to start protecting their equipment. Without payment, violins are just wood and strings in the wrong hands. I imagined Ashley standing near the altar arrangement, radiant in her gown, hearing the words she never expected. Your father has stopped payment. I imagined the first crack in her smile, the first flicker of panic in Nathan's eyes. Guests whispering, phones coming out, the night turning from polished spectacle to spectacle of another kind. More vehicles arrived. A small box truck with the logo of a photography studio. 2 men unloading hard cases, moving faster than any photographer at ease. Another van with sound equipment, cables coiled in bins, each company arriving with the same determined stride. They had been paid to build the illusion of perfection. Without payment, they would dismantle it piece by piece. I stayed in my truck, silent, steady. Every clang of a cart on the loading ramp echoed like punctuation to a sentence I had written long ago without realizing. Love without gratitude becomes entitlement. Entitlement eventually meets a wall. Tonight, I was the wall. Through the tall windows, I could just make out the silhouettes moving inside. Guests turning, confusion rippling through the crowd like wind through wheat. A hand raised to hush the music, Ashley's veil trailing as she moved quickly toward the florist. Nathan stepping forward, sharp movements, anger on his face. It played out like a scene on a stage, but I knew this was no performance. The florist team carried out the first load, orchids wrapped in clear plastic, stems protruding awkwardly. They slid the arrangements into tubs with businesslike precision. Behind them the caterers rolled out trays still half full, steam escaping in the cool night air. The sound techs stacked black cases onto dollies, their cords dragging like tails. Guests in gowns and tuxedos gathered near the doorways, half whispering, half gawking. Some tried to mask their fascination with polite dismay. Others leaned in, hungry for the drama. I had been invisible when I stood in that doorway an hour earlier. Now my absence filled the room. The unraveling was not loud. There was no shouting from the vendors, no scenes. Just quiet removal, the reversal of hours of preparation. Flowers out, food out. Music stopped, lights dimmed. One detail at a time stripped away until the ballroom would look less like a wedding and more like an empty shell. I sat with my hands folded on the wheel, breathing evenly. This was not revenge. Revenge is messy, fueled by rage. This was clarity. This was the ledger balancing itself in real time. The rain finally began, soft drops pattering against the windshield. It streaked the glass, blurring the ballroom lights until they looked like smudges of gold paint running down the night. I thought of Ashley again as a child, laughing when I carried her through summer storms on my shoulders. Now she was inside, drenched not by rain but by consequences. Another cart banged against the dock. Another load disappeared into the vans. I turned the key slightly, listening to the steady hum of the engine. The night had only just begun, but their party was already over. Through the rain-streaked glass, I could still make out the outlines of the ballroom. At first, it was only small movements. A cart rolled in, a centerpiece lifted, a few heads turning. Then the ripples began to spread. A conversation cut short. A woman's hand frozen halfway to her lips. A waiter pausing with a tray of champagne as the music faltered. Inside, the orchestra's sound grew thinner until it stopped altogether. The bow of the lead violinist lowered slowly, his expression tight, his body turning toward the side door where the equipment crew had already started wrapping chords. A murmur swept across the room. What began as whispers soon became a low, restless hum, the kind that makes people glance around searching for someone in charge. Ashley's white dress stood out against the sea of dark suits and jewel-toned gowns. I watched her glide toward the floral display at the altar, her veil dragging like a tide she could no longer control. She wore a practiced smile, the same one she had used to charm sponsors and professors years earlier, but her hands trembled just enough to give her away. She reached the florist, speaking quickly, chin lifted in command. The florist answered calmly, producing paperwork, pointing to a signature line. Guests nearby leaned closer, unable to resist. Then Nathan stormed across the floor. His tuxedo was crisp, his face flushed. He gestured broadly at the florist, his voice raised. I could not hear through the glass, but I did not need to. I had seen men like him on job sites when invoices came due and excuses ran out. His posture said everything. He believed outrage could replace payment. The caterers moved in next. White cloths draped over silver serving trays, steam rising and then disappearing. Staff dismantled carving stations while confused guests clutched their plates. A man in a tuxedo argued with one of the caterers, pointing at his half-filled glass, but the server only shook his head and rolled the cart away. The illusion of endless abundance cracked like plaster under pressure. At the far end of the room, the venue coordinator stepped up on a small platform. She held a phone to her ear, her other hand raised for silence. Her lips pressed into a line as she spoke to Ashley. I imagined her words because I had already given her the reason. All payments for this event were withdrawn by Robert Miller, the account holder. That account holder was me. Ashley's smile collapsed. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes darting across the crowd as though searching for a lifeline. Nathan grabbed her wrist, muttering sharply. Her face twisted, part fear, part shame. Around them the guests shifted uncomfortably, some hiding behind polite expressions, others openly gawking. The string of pearls around one woman's neck caught the chandelier light as she whispered to the man beside her. The man nodded slowly, his gaze locked on Ashley, judgment plain in his eyes. The room itself seemed to sag. Without flowers, without music, without food, the grand ballroom looked less like a royal hall and more like an empty stage after the curtain falls. The chandeliers still glowed, but their light felt harsh now, exposing every crack, every flaw. The hum of conversation had turned into a low roar of discomfort. No one knew whether to stay or leave. I could picture Ashley's thoughts racing. She must have remembered every check I signed, every bill I covered, every sacrifice I made. Perhaps for the first time she realized that the father she dismissed at the doorway held the foundation of her world in his hands. Nathan's parents stood near the bar, their expressions stiff. His mother whispered to his father, who shook his head slowly, his lips tight with disapproval. Other guests drifted toward the exits, their excuses murmured, their eyes avoiding Ashley's. The social climb she had dreamed of was slipping under her feet like loose gravel. From my truck I felt no joy, no triumph, only a steady calm as I watched the perfect celebration fold in on itself. They had chosen to erase me from their family moment. They had believed appearances would carry them through. Now appearances were betraying them in front of everyone. The florist's team carried out the last altar arrangement. The caterers wheeled away the final covered trays. The musicians filed out silently, their cases closed. Even the lighting dimmed as the sound technician unplugged the board. The ballroom was unraveling, not with noise, but with a slow, deliberate emptiness. I gripped the wheel tighter, rain drumming on the roof of my truck. Through the tall windows, I saw Ashley in the center of it all, her dress bright and perfect, her world collapsing piece by piece. She had told me I did not belong. Now she stood in a room that no longer belonged to her either. I drove home in silence, the hum of the tires steady against the wet pavement. The rain followed me most of the way, tapping lightly on the roof of the truck like an impatient hand. By the time I pulled into the garage, the storm had eased, leaving the air thick with that smell of wet concrete I had known all my life. I shut off the engine and sat there for a moment, listening to the garage door close behind me. It sounded like a curtain dropping on the first act of a play. My phone buzzed against the console, one voicemail, then another. By the time I unlocked the front door and stepped into the quiet of my house, there were already 4. I set my keys on the counter, slipped off my boots, and finally pressed play. The first message came in hot, Ashley's voice sharp with panic. "Dad, something's wrong with the payments. The vendors are saying they didn't get the money. Can you call me back right away?" Her voice cracked at the end, the first hint of fear I had heard from her in years. The second voicemail was quicker, her words tumbling over each other. "This isn't funny, Dad. They're taking the flowers, the food, everything. People are staring. You need to fix this. Call me back right now." I could almost see her pacing, dress rustling against the floor, guests watching as she tried to keep her voice from shaking. The third was softer, threaded with desperation. "Please, Dad. I don't understand what's happening. Nathan's family is asking questions. His mother keeps looking at me like I've lied to them. I need you. Please, pick up." I stopped the playback and sat there with the phone in my hand. The living room was dim except for the small lamp I had left on by the recliner. The house smelled faintly of sawdust from the work I had been doing in the basement. On the far wall hung the framed photo of Ashley at 8 years old, gap-toothed and beaming after her first school play. She had looked straight into the camera and shouted, "Did you see me, Daddy?" I remembered clapping until my hands ached, just to make sure she heard me above everyone else. Now the same little girl's voice trembled in my ear, not with pride, but with panic. I pressed play again. The fourth voicemail was longer. Her tone had shifted from panic to pleading. "Dad, please answer. Michael's family is furious." They're asking how everything was paid for, and I don't know what to tell them. People are leaving, Dad. They're walking out, and I can't stop them. I need you. Please don't do this to me. My thumb hovered over the screen, tempted for a moment to call her back. But then another memory came, this one colder. Ashley at 19 leaning against her BMW, the one I bought after she complained her Honda was embarrassing. She had tossed me the keys without a thank you, talking about how everyone else's parents bought them better. That was the day I first saw entitlement in her eyes. I had brushed it off, convinced myself she would grow out of it. Instead, it had grown roots. The phone buzzed again in my hand. Another voicemail. Then another. I let them pile up. I needed to hear them, all of them, not to punish her, but to understand where this night was taking us. I moved to my office and switched on the desk lamp. The warm light pooled over the oak surface, where file drawers lined the wall like sentinels. I opened the one marked Ashley Education. Folders were stacked neatly, each one labeled with dates, schools, amounts. I set them on the desk and let her voice play through the speaker. Voicemail 5. Dad, I know I haven't said thank you enough, but this is my wedding. You can't just ruin it like this. Please, I'll talk to you tomorrow, I promise. Just fix this tonight. Voicemail 6. Her voice broke. I can't stop crying. Nathan's father said this is humiliating. Mom would never have let this happen. Why are you doing this to me? I closed my eyes at that last line. Mom would never have let this happen. Sarah's name spoken as a weapon, used against me by the daughter we had raised together. The ache in my chest deepened, but my hand stayed steady. I pulled out another drawer marked Ashley Lifestyle. Receipts, statements, credit card bailouts. Every page proof of choices I had made in silence. The 7th voicemail came just before midnight. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. Dad, I don't know where to go from here. Everyone's left. Nathan won't even look at me. Please just tell me what you want. I set the phone down on the desk beside the stacks of folders. The room was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. For the first time all evening, I felt the weight of years settle fully on my shoulders. Every bedtime story, every tuition check, every car payment, every trip abroad, they had led us here, to a house filled with files, to a daughter leaving messages like lifelines she had never thought she'd need. I did not call her back. Not yet. The night still had work to do. The folders lay open across my desk, the weight of paper heavier than steel beams. I pulled the first one closer, marked in my handwriting with black ink, Ashley Education. Inside were 12 years of tuition slips, each one folded neatly with receipts clipped. $8,000 in 2008, $9,000 in 2009. By the time she graduated high school, the numbers had climbed to $12,000 a year. I traced the totals with my finger, remembering the nights I had skipped dinner so payroll could clear, remembering the extra jobs I took just to make sure she wore the best uniform in class. I had told myself it was an investment, and in that moment I realized investments expect returns, and I had received none. I opened the next file, Northwestern University. The folder was swollen, thick with contracts for dorm rooms, meal plans, study abroad trips. Tuition alone was $52,000 a year, room and board 15 more, a receipt for a spring break in Cancun, $3,500, another for a summer art program in Florence, $8,200. I could still hear her voice at 19, telling me the Italy trip was essential for networking. I had believed her because I wanted to believe in her. The total for 4 years was more than $280,000. The number sat on the page like a stone in my chest. I kept moving. A file labeled Transportation. Inside were copies of bills for the first car at 16, a Honda Civic I bought outright for $18,000. I remembered her embarrassed smile when she said everyone else drove BMWs. That embarrassment grew into demands. At 19, she wanted the BMW 320i, $28,000. At 25, a BMW SUV for $29,000 more, because Nathan's friends all drove luxury. Each purchase came with insurance, maintenance, and my quiet prayers that this time she would be satisfied. I added the totals in the margin and stared at the sum. $75,000, just so she could keep up with people who never worked a day in their lives. The lifestyle folder was harder to open. Credit card statements, receipts from boutiques, spa memberships, vacation photos with friends. I had covered balances when she went over her allowance, telling myself she was young, that she would grow out of it. I paid off charges for designer handbags, four-figure gowns, weekend trips to New York. The stack of paper reached nearly 3 inches high. I added columns, the numbers climbing. $180,000. I whispered the figure out loud, unable to believe I had let it slip away piece by piece. Then came the wedding folder. The latest, the thickest. Contracts for the venue, catering, flowers, photography, music. Her dress receipt alone was $13,000. Imported orchids, $25,000. Catering deposits, $40,000. Every page was signed by me. $147,000 for a day I had not even been welcome to attend. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the mountain of paper. I pulled out a blank spreadsheet, the same kind I used to calculate project costs at job sites. I typed headers across the top: date, description, amount, category, running total. My fingers moved without hesitation, years of habit guiding me. Tuition went into education, cars into transportation, apartments into housing, clothing, trips, spa days into lifestyle. The numbers added themselves in columns until they formed a single figure at the bottom. $937,000. Nearly $1 million. I sat still, the glow of the desk lamp pooling over the page. The house around me was silent, but in my ears I heard echoes of her voice at 5 years old asking me for one more bedtime story. I heard her at 12 thanking me for being at every spelling bee. I heard her at 16 asking why her car was not good enough. At 20 asking for more money for fraternity trips. At 28 telling me to leave her wedding. The ledger was not just numbers. It was years of love translated into dollars. It was late nights, bent shoulders, calloused hands, all converted into contracts and balances, and it was silence where thank yous should have been. Not once had she asked what it cost me. Not once had she wondered what I gave up so she could have more. I looked at the total again. $937,000. If it had been a business deal, I would have demanded accountability years ago. Instead, I had called it love, and love had blinded me to the pattern. Tonight, the blindfold was gone. The phone buzzed again, another voicemail waiting. I did not answer. I turned back to the spreadsheet and printed the summary. The machine whirred, spitting out the page, black ink declaring the truth in numbers. Education, transportation, housing, lifestyle, wedding, $937,000. I slipped the paper into a new folder and wrote on the tab in block letters, Ledger of Love. I sat back and let the chair creak beneath me. The paper piles surrounded me like evidence in a courtroom, evidence against myself as much as against her. I had enabled it, financed it, ignored the warnings, and now I held the bill for 25 years of sacrifice with no gratitude in return. The rain outside tapped on the windows. The house smelled faintly of coffee brewing in the kitchen. I stared at the folder one last time before closing it. The lesson was written clearly in black and white. Love without gratitude is not love. It is debt, and tonight that debt had finally come due. Morning came gray and cold. I had not slept, not really. My body had rested in the recliner, but my mind had stayed awake, replaying numbers, voices, and the sight of Ashley's face when the vendors began to pack up. By the time the first light slid through the blinds, I had already showered, dressed, and stacked the folders neatly into my worn leather briefcase. The coffee pot hissed in the kitchen, the bitter smell filling the house. I poured 1 cup, black, and drank it standing by the window. The streets outside were quiet, just the sound of a garbage truck in the distance. By 9 o'clock, I was pushing open the heavy glass doors of Chen and Walters LLP, a law office downtown with polished brass handles and mahogany panels that smelled faintly of lemon oil. I had worked with them before on construction disputes. I trusted their precision. This time, it was not about contracts for steel beams or permits. It was about blood, family, and almost $1 million that had been spent like loose change. The receptionist, young and efficient, led me into a conference room. A long table of dark wood stretched across the room, leather chairs tucked neatly in. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, lighting the framed diplomas and shelves of legal volumes. I placed my briefcase on the table and waited. My hand rested on the case like I was protecting something alive inside it. The door opened, and in walked Linda Chen, sharp suit, silver streak through her dark hair, glasses perched low as she read a file in her hand. She looked up at me with a steady expression. "Mr. Miller, you came prepared." I nodded and opened the briefcase, sliding the folders across the table one by one. 25 years of support, I said. Education, housing, transportation, lifestyle, wedding. Every receipt, every bank transfer, every contract. 937,000 in total. She spread the papers across the table with practiced efficiency, scanning line after line. Her pen scratched across a yellow legal pad as she wrote notes. "Your record-keeping is meticulous. It will make this much easier." "I don't want revenge," I told her. My voice was even, almost flat. "I want boundaries. I want her to understand that money isn't endless and gratitude isn't optional. If this were business, she would have been accountable years ago. So let's make it business." Linda looked up, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Then we treat it as recoverable debt. We issue a formal demand letter, 30 days to respond, with a full accounting attached. If she ignores it, we file suit. It is clean, professional, unemotional." "Good," I said. "That's exactly what I want." She tapped her pen against the folder labeled wedding. "This alone is 147,000. Combined with the lifestyle expenses and education, the total is substantial enough to carry legal weight. We can reclassify the payments as loans. You have documentation for each." I leaned back in my chair and let the words sink in. Loans. For years I had told myself it was love, sacrifice, duty. But written down, documented, it looked no different than loans given to a careless client who never intended to pay back. Linda continued, her tone precise. "We will prepare the letter on official letterhead. It will request repayment in full within 30 days. That creates a clear timeline. If she or her husband tries to challenge it publicly, you will already have taken the high road. This is business, not family drama." I nodded slowly. My hands rested flat on the table. She needs to see the cost of her choices in black and white. She needs to understand that every dollar had weight, and that weight nearly broke me. "Of." Linda gathered the papers back into neat piles. "We will courier the documents today. Signature required. There will be a record that she received it. That alone will change the conversation in her household." I thought of Ashley opening the envelope in a hotel room, her gown hanging limp in the closet, her husband reading the pages with growing anger. I pictured her face as she saw the total written at the bottom. 937,000. A number that no charm, no smile, no apology could erase. The conference room was quiet, except for the hum of the air vent. I studied the grain of the wood table, the way the light caught in its lines. My chest felt heavy, but steady. This was not an outburst. This was structure, foundation, the kind of clarity I had built my company on. Linda slid a draft of the demand letter across the table. "Review this. If you approve, we will finalize by noon." I read the words carefully. Each line was professional, stripped of emotion, formal demand for repayment, supporting documentation attached, 30 days to comply, consequences for non-compliance. It did not read like the voice of a father. It read like the voice of a creditor. I signed at the bottom and handed it back. Send it. Linda nodded, gathering the folders once more. You're making the right move, Mr. Miller. This is not punishment, it's clarity. I stood and closed my briefcase, the leather creaking softly. As I left the office, sunlight poured through the tall windows onto the polished floor. Outside, the city was alive with Monday traffic, people rushing with briefcases and coffee cups, unaware that a single family's story had just turned into a business transaction. I walked back to my truck and slid into the driver's seat. The clock on the dash read 11:04. The first act of the night had ended in whispers and humiliation. This new act had begun with ink and signatures. And in 30 days my daughter would learn that the love she had taken for granted had always carried a price. The first sign came the next morning when Rachel, my assistant, knocked on my office door with a look that told me something was wrong. She held her tablet out to me, the screen glowing with a Facebook post. At the top was a picture of Ashley from the wedding, radiant in her gown, Nathan's arm around her, both of them smiling like the night had been perfect. Below the photo were words that tightened in my chest as I read them. My father ruined my wedding. He withdrew every payment out of spite. He embarrassed me in front of everyone. I never imagined a parent could be so cruel. The post had over 200 shares already. Comments filled the screen, people I didn't know offering sympathy, others speculating about what kind of man would destroy his daughter's happiness. Some had tagged local business pages, men I'd worked with for decades. Rachel's voice was quiet. This is spreading fast. Not an hour later, the phone began to ring. First, it was Bob Martinez from Martinez Concrete, a man I'd built projects with for 20 years. His voice carried a careful tone. James, I'm hearing some talk online. People saying you lost your temper at your daughter's wedding, that you cut off payments in some kind of revenge. Is everything okay? I told him there was documentation, that things were not what they seemed. He hesitated before answering. I believe you, but people are asking questions. You know how this town island reputation is currency. After that, the calls came steady. A city contractor asking if our bid for the new civic center might be compromised. A supplier wondering if my accounts were stable. Even the Rotary Club president called to say he hoped I was all right, though his tone suggested he was fishing for reassurance more than offering support. By noon, I realized what was happening. Ashley and Nathan, or maybe Nathan's family, were using their connections. They had money, names on charity boards, seats at country clubs. They were spreading a story, painting me as unstable, vengeful, dangerous to be around. In a place like Denver, that kind of whisper could ruin contracts faster than any lawsuit. I leaned back in my chair, letting the phone buzz on the desk. My office smelled faintly of cedar and dust from the blueprints piled in the corner. I stared at the framed picture of the first office building I ever built. 25 years of work, each brick laid with sweat, every client relationship earned with honesty. Now a few posts on social media threatened to undo it. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat at the desk. The folders from yesterday were still stacked neatly, their tabs clear. Education, housing, transportation, lifestyle, wedding, proof of nearly $1 million spent in silence. Proof that I had not ruined anything. Proof that I had built everything. The phone rang again, the display showing another contractor's name. I let it go to voicemail. I had learned long ago that when people questioned your integrity, words were never enough. You needed evidence. You needed to put the truth in their hands so heavy they couldn't ignore it. Rachel came back into the office around 3. It's everywhere now, she said. Community forums, business groups. They're saying you demanded money back from your daughter. They're calling it cruel. Some even say you're unstable. Her eyes searched mine for a reaction. I only nodded. Good, then it's time to answer. She frowned, not understanding. Answer how? I opened the briefcase again and laid the folders out across the desk. Not with words, with this. Every dollar, every receipt, every transfer. If they want to play this in public, then I'll give the public the truth. Um, Rachel hesitated, then nodded slowly. She had been with me long enough to know that once I made up my mind, I followed through. I sat in the quiet office after she left, listening to the faint hum of traffic outside the window. Ashley thought she could win sympathy by crying foul. Nathan thought his last name and his family's influence could bury me under gossip. They had both forgotten one thing. I had built my life on documentation, on contracts, on records no one could dispute. The smear had started, yes, but smears are only shadows, and I had light waiting in drawers, ready to shine. I picked up my phone and scrolled to the number for the local business journal. When the editor answered, I spoke plainly. "This is Robert Miller. I have a story you're going to want to see. 25 years of records, $1 million of sacrifice, and the truth about a wedding everyone's whispering about." As I ended the call, I felt something in my chest shift. Not anger, not sadness, resolve. They had chosen the battlefield. Now I would meet them there, but not with emotion, with proof, with the kind of weight that crushes lies flat. The next morning I stood at the front of a modest community center with a stack of binders beside me. The room smelled faintly of coffee and dust. The folding chairs lined up in neat rows. A handful of reporters sat with notepads ready, a couple of camera operators adjusting tripods, and in the back I recognized contractors and small business owners I had known for years. Their faces carried curiosity and doubt, the kind that comes when rumor runs faster than truth. I cleared my throat and set the first binder on the podium. The weight of it echoed in the microphone. "Thank you for coming," I began, my voice steady. "For the past few days there have been stories circulating about me, about my family, and about an incident at my daughter's wedding. I am here today not with emotion, but with documentation." I opened the binder and held up the first page. A tuition bill from Riverside Academy, dated 2008, paid in full by Robert Miller. I laid it flat on the projector, and the numbers lit up on the screen behind me. Then another and another. 12 years of private school tuition, every check signed, every note from the school thanking me for prompt payment. The murmurs in the room grew quiet. Next came Northwestern University. 4 years of tuition statements, dorm contracts, meal plans. $52,000 a year, $15,000 more for housing. A copy of the study abroad invoice for Florence, stamped paid. The Cancun trip receipt. Each page projected larger than life on the wall, impossible to deny. I moved methodically, just as I had prepared. Transportation records, bills of sale for the Civic, the BMW sedan, the SUV, insurance statements, registration renewals. Then lifestyle expenses, the credit card statements showing thousands in charges at designer stores, airline tickets for vacations, spa memberships, all of them paid down by me. Finally, I opened the wedding binder, the largest of them all. A contract for the Brown Palace Hotel, deposits for Summit Catering, mile-high florals, music, photography, linen rentals, a receipt for the dress, $13,000, and a separate one for the orchids, $25,000. Each document carried my name as the payer. I let the pages speak louder than any words I could have said. The projector light flickered as I displayed the spreadsheet, the running total bold at the bottom, $937,000. 25 years of support. Not a gift once in a while, not a loan here and there, but a steady stream of sacrifice that had been dismissed the moment I was told to leave her wedding. The room was silent. I let the number hang in the air before I spoke again. This is not revenge. This is not anger. This is simply the truth. 25 years of support without gratitude. A wedding paid in full by me, followed by an invitation to leave. I will not allow half-truths or lies to define who I am or what I have given. If anyone wishes to question my integrity, they now have the documents to read for themselves. A reporter raised her hand cautiously. "Mr. Miller, why go public with this? Why not keep it within the family?" I looked her straight in the eye. Because it was taken public first. Lies were spread. My reputation was attacked. I built my business on trust. When that trust is questioned, I respond the only way I know how, with proof. Another voice from the back. A contractor I had worked with on office complexes. James, I had no idea. Those numbers, that's almost 1 million. I nodded. Almost 1 million. And not once did she ask what it cost me. Not once did she say thank you. The questions slowed after that. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras clicked, and the room shifted from doubt to quiet understanding. I saw it in the faces of the men and women I had built alongside. They recognized sacrifice when they saw it in black and white. When the session ended, people approached me one by one. Some offered a handshake, some a pat on the shoulder, others simply said they understood now. A few of the reporters asked for copies of the binders. I had prepared extras and handed them over. Transparency was the only weapon I needed. As I packed the binders back into my briefcase, I felt a strange stillness settle in my chest. Not triumph, not satisfaction, but clarity. For years I had given without boundaries. Now I had drawn the line and shown the world exactly where it stood. Outside the sky was clear, the sun bright against the city buildings. I stepped into the light with the briefcase heavy at my side. The smear had been loud and fast, but truth carried its own weight, and that weight was finally on my side. It was 2 days after the press meeting when I heard what happened inside the Bennett house. Word travels quickly in a city where reputation is worth more than steel or concrete. One of my subcontractors' wives worked as a caterer for their neighborhood parties, and she repeated what she had overheard. By then, the story was already moving in quiet circles, whispered over cocktails and golf games. Nathan had come home late that night, his tie loosened, his face drawn. His parents were waiting in the sitting room, the kind of room reserved for family discussions that are not meant to be overheard. His father asked him to sit. His mother's voice was soft but firm. She had received 3 calls that day from friends asking about the headlines, about the binders of evidence, about the nearly $1 million of support that had been published in the papers. I pictured Nathan's expression as the weight of it landed. His confidence had always come from his family name, from a belief that appearances could smooth over any truth. But this time the truth was too heavy. His parents made it clear that their social standing could not withstand the whispers of financial deception. They had invested their own reputation into Ashley when they allowed her into their circle, and now they looked like fools for not asking questions sooner. Ashley must have pleaded. I can imagine her tears, her voice cracking as she tried to explain that she never knew the total, that she thought it was just what fathers did. But Nathan's father was not listening with sympathy. He was thinking about the family trust, about the board seats, about how quickly an association with irresponsibility could corrode business deals. By the next morning, Nathan began packing a suitcase. Ashley stood in the doorway, her hair unbrushed, still wearing the silk robe from their honeymoon suite. She begged him to wait, to talk, to remember the vows they had spoken less than a week earlier. He barely looked at her as he folded shirts with sharp, angry movements. His words were clipped, each one like a hammer strike. My family wants me home. They say I need to protect myself. They think this marriage was built on deception. Ashley must have reached for his arm. I imagined the desperation in her grip, but he pulled free. Your father published everything, he said. The whole city knows I'm married into a disaster. Do you have any idea what that looks like for me? For my future? She tried to answer, but he kept talking, his voice louder, sharper. What have you ever brought into this marriage besides bills and expectations? You never worked, you never earned, you never asked what anything cost. You let me believe your father was simply proud and generous, not that he had financed your entire life. Now I look like a fool in front of everyone I know. Her sobs filled the hallway, echoing off marble floors and expensive wallpaper. She clutched at him as he zipped the suitcase, but he did not soften. Even his mother's text arrived while he stood there, the words polite and cold. Michael needs to come home. Family obligations, you understand. Nathan kissed her forehead once, a gesture more out of habit than tenderness, and then he left. The door shut with a final click that must have sounded louder than any slam. Ashley collapsed onto the floor, surrounded by wedding gifts she no longer had the strength to open. The house around her was filled with silence, broken only by the sound of her own crying. I sat at my desk that evening, the reports of his departure already reaching me. The briefcase with the folders still rested by the chair, a reminder of what had been shown to the world. I thought of Ashley in that empty house, her gown still hanging in the closet, her husband gone after 6 days. I did not feel joy in it. I felt the slow ache of recognition. The life she had built on appearances had collapsed under the truth. The match she thought was perfect had dissolved into smoke the moment it faced reality. Through the window, I watched the Denver skyline glowing against the night. My phone was silent for once. No new voicemails, no fresh smears, only the weight of consequences settling exactly where they belonged. My daughter had chosen to remove me from her wedding. Now her husband had chosen to remove himself from her life. And the collapse had only just begun. I heard her voice again 3 nights later. It was late, nearly midnight, when my phone lit up with her name. I let it ring, let the voicemail catch it, then listened in the quiet of my kitchen. She sounded smaller than I had ever heard her. "Dad, I'm at a hotel. I don't have anywhere else to go. Nathan's family won't take my calls. His mother blocked my number. I tried friends, but they all said they couldn't get involved. Please, I just need to hear your voice." I set the phone down on the table and stared at the clock on the stove. The digital numbers glowed 11:58. The house was still. The only sound, the faint hum of the refrigerator. Outside the street was dark, rain tapping lightly against the windows. I leaned back in the chair and let her words wash over me. For the first time in her life, she had no one running to solve her problems. In the morning, I heard more. A cousin of mine who still lived across town called to tell me Ashley had reached out to her. She had asked if she could borrow money for another week at the hotel. My cousin told her no, gently, and said maybe it was time she learned how to take care of herself. Ashley had hung up quickly, embarrassed, maybe angry, but she had no power left in her voice. I pictured her alone in that small hotel room, the kind with stiff carpet and heavy curtains that block out the daylight. The wedding gifts piled in a corner, unopened. Her phone clutched in her hand, scrolling through contacts, realizing how few of them would answer now. The credit cards maxed out. The checking account nearly empty. No husband, no family-in-law, no friends willing to stake their reputations on her defense. That afternoon she tried again. "Dad, I don't know what to do. Everyone is gone. Nathan won't even text me back. His father told him to annul the marriage. I don't have money for rent. I don't even have money for groceries. I can't stop shaking. Please tell me what I'm supposed to do." Her voice cracked, and for a moment I heard the child she once was, the little girl who used to climb onto my lap in her pink pajamas, asking me to read another story. But the weight of years pressed back against the sound. I remembered her telling me last Christmas to please wear something nicer than boots when I visited because Nathan's friends were there. I remembered the sting of her words at the wedding door. "You weren't invited. Please leave." Still, I could not deny the image of her sitting on that hotel bed, staring at a phone that had stopped ringing back. Isolation has a sound, and it is silence where voices used to be. By the end of the week, I had counted 14 voicemails, each one more frantic than the last. She begged for help, promised she would change, swore she would find work, pleaded with me not to abandon her. In the background of one, I could hear the muffled voice of the hotel clerk reminding her the bill needed to be settled by morning. In another, I heard her crying so hard she could barely form words. I did not answer, not yet. I let the messages pile up because I knew she needed to feel the depth of it. She needed to understand what it meant when the safety net was cut, when every door she once thought automatic was suddenly locked. At night I walked through my house, the rooms dim and quiet. In my office the folders still sat stacked neatly, evidence of years that had brought us to this point. I ran my fingers along the spines of the binders, feeling the texture of paper, the permanence of ink. Almost $1 million in black and white. And yet she had believed love was endless, a bottomless well she could draw from without ever giving thanks. Now she was learning what empty felt like. On Saturday, another voicemail arrived, this one softer. Dad, I tried calling Lisa, but she said she can't help. I called Sarah, she won't pick up. Everyone is turning away from me. I didn't think it would be like this. I didn't think people could leave so quickly. Please, I just need one person not to leave me. I sat at the kitchen table, the phone screen glowing in my hand. Outside the night was silent, no rain, no wind, just the weight of her words filling the space. Isolation had finally wrapped around her completely. She was alone, truly alone, for the first time in her life. I did not press call. I turned the phone face down on the table and stared at the ceiling. I knew the lesson was only beginning. Her 15th voicemail was the one that finally made me pick up. It was just after dusk, the house quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee when the phone lit up again. Her voice came through the speaker, thin and raw. Dad, I don't know how much longer I can stay here. They're telling me I need to pay tomorrow or leave. I don't want to call anyone else. I just want to hear from you. Please, Dad, tell me what to do. I pressed the phone to my ear and said her name. For a long moment there was only silence on the other end, then a sharp inhale. Dad, you answered? Oh, thank God, please, I'm falling apart here, I need you. My voice stayed level. I told her I had heard every message. I told her I knew exactly what was happening. And then I told her that this time would be different. Different how? She asked quickly, panic edging her words. This time there will be conditions, I said. If you want help, you will listen carefully. Her breathing picked up. Anything, Dad. I'll do anything. Just don't hang up. I leaned forward, staring at the dark surface of the table. You'll have 1 week. I'll transfer $1,000. That covers the hotel for 7 nights, and enough food to get by. After that, no more. Not a dime. You'll need to find a job within 2 weeks. I don't care if it's washing dishes or cleaning floors. Pride is something you can't afford anymore. Her voice wavered. A job? Dad, I don't even know how... I cut her off. Then you'll learn. Everyone else learns. You're 28 years old. It's time you stood on your own feet. The line went quiet except for her breathing. I could almost hear her mind racing, searching for excuses for the old ways that used to work. Then the sob broke through. I'll do it. I'll find something. Just please don't leave me with nothing. There's more, I said. For 6 months you will not ask me for money. None. You will live on what you earn. If you can't manage, you'll figure it out. That's how adults live. She sniffled hard, her words small now. 6 months. Okay, I promise. And one more, I continued. We'll speak once a week, but not as a father handing money to a child. We'll speak as 2 adults. I want to know what you're doing, how you're surviving, what you're learning. If you want to be treated like family again, you'll earn that respect. Her voice cracked, almost a whisper. I want that, Dad. I don't want to lose you. I let the silence hang for a beat, then said, I'll transfer the money tonight. But remember, this isn't a rescue. It's a chance. You get one. Oh, the sobs came again, broken words spilling through the line. Thank you. I know I don't deserve it, but thank you. I won't let you down. I ended the call and sat in the stillness of the kitchen. The coffee had gone cold. My hand rested on the phone, the glow fading from the screen. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small crack in the wall around my chest. Not forgiveness yet, but the faint outline of something that could be built if she meant what she said. Later that night, I logged into my account and made the transfer. $1,000. I wrote the confirmation number on a slip of paper and tucked it into the Ledger of Love folder, not as another expense, but as a marker, the beginning of something new or the last attempt I would ever make. The house creaked softly as I turned off the lights. Upstairs, the bedroom felt colder than usual. I lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, hearing her voice repeat in my head, "I'll find something. I'll do it. I won't let you down." I had heard promises before, plenty of them, but this time the conditions were carved into stone. No money beyond the week, work within 2 weeks, no requests for 6 months. Weekly conversations, adult to adult. If she followed through, perhaps we would find our way back. If she failed, she would fall. But she would fall on her own choices, not on my shoulders. I closed my eyes finally, letting exhaustion pull me under. The night was still, the city outside quiet. Somewhere across town, my daughter sat in a hotel room with $1,000 to her name, the first real limit she had ever faced. Whether she would rise to it or break under it, only time would tell. The following week passed with a strange rhythm. In the mornings, I drove to job sites, checking foundations, reviewing blueprints, listening to the steady noise of machinery moving dirt and steel. The smell of earth and diesel was familiar, comforting, the sound of something solid being built from the ground up. Yet each night I came home to silence, my phone resting on the counter, waiting for the one call that now mattered more than the others. On the second evening it came. Ashley's voice was softer, steadier than before. "Dad, I went to 3 places today. A diner down on Colfax, a bakery a few blocks from the hotel, and a grocery store that needed cashiers. The bakery manager said he might call me back." She laughed nervously. He didn't seem impressed by my resume, but at least I filled one out. I told her that was a start. I reminded her that showing up mattered more than polish. "Keep walking through doors. One will open." On the 4th day she called again, a spark in her tone. "They hired me, Dad. The bakery. I start tomorrow morning. It's only $14.75 an hour, but it's something." I could almost see her face when she said it, not proud exactly, but carrying a small flicker of dignity. She added, "They gave me a uniform shirt. It smells like flour." I hung up that night and sat for a long time in my office, staring at the binders on the shelf. For the first time I thought maybe those files would not be the only story left behind. Meanwhile, the community around me was shifting in its own way. After the press conference, contractors called not to question me but to offer support. "We've got your back," one told me. Another said, "That girl needed to learn. You did right." Even at the Rotary meeting, where whispers often ran faster than truth, men shook my hand with steady eyes. The narrative had turned, and I felt the weight of years of honest work standing behind me like a wall. At church on Sunday, one of the elders pulled me aside. "James, I read every word of those records. I hope she understands now what you've carried." I nodded, not trusting myself to say much more. His hand on my shoulder was enough. Ashley called again the next week, her voice carrying a mix of exhaustion and pride. "Dad, I worked 2 full shifts. My feet hurt so bad I could barely walk back to the hotel, but I did it. I even brought home a loaf of bread they let me have at the end of the day." She paused, then added quietly, "I never knew how hard people worked for so little." I never thought about it before. That admission sat heavy in me. It was the first time she had spoken of anyone outside herself, the first crack of understanding. I told her to write it down, to remember the feeling when the temptation came to forget. Later that week, she texted me a photo of her first pay stub. The numbers were small, hardly more than pocket money compared to what I had once poured into her life, but it was hers. She wrote under the photo, "First day." I showed up. I stared at the message for a long time before replying, "Proud of you. Keep going." At the same time, my own world felt lighter. At a site downtown, the crew gathered around during a break, talking about the news stories. One of them said, "Boss, people finally saw what you went through. You raised her on your own and gave her everything. Nobody can doubt that now." Their respect was quiet but real, the kind you cannot buy, only earn. Even the mayor's office issued a small statement about the importance of financial responsibility in families. It was polite, almost detached, but I could read between the lines. The city had no intention of letting gossip undo a man who had built half their office parks and schools. That night, sitting alone in the living room, I thought about mirrors. The community was a mirror, reflecting back the years I had given, the truth I had documented. And now Ashley was staring into her own mirror, the reflection of a woman in a bakery apron, hair tied back, hands dusted with flour, learning at last what effort meant. The conditions were holding. $1,000 had stretched a week. She had found a job within 2. She had not asked for more money. Each call between us felt a little more like 2 adults speaking instead of a child begging from a parent. I did not let hope run too far ahead of me. I knew habits built over decades do not vanish in days, but for the first time I could imagine a path forward that was not built entirely on my shoulders. When I went to bed that night, I left the office light on, the binders lined neatly against the wall. They were still there, still the record of everything that had passed. But beside them I placed the printed photo she had texted me, the pay stub with her note. It was thin paper, barely worth the ink on it, but in that moment it felt heavier than all the receipts combined. It was proof of something I had almost given up on, proof that maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to build her own life. The attic smelled of cedar and dust when I pulled down the old ladder. The wood creaked beneath my weight as I climbed into the dim space, a single bulb swaying overhead. Boxes lined the rafters, labeled in my handwriting from years ago, Christmas lights, tax records, baby clothes, and near the back, covered with a folded quilt, sat the cedar chest with Sarah's name carved faintly on the lid. I had not opened it in years. My hands rested on the cool wood for a long moment before I lifted the lid. Inside were keepsakes she had left behind, some mine, some meant for Ashley when the time was right. Her favorite scarf, still holding a faint trace of her perfume, a small photo album of Ashley's earliest birthdays, and an envelope sealed in Sarah's neat handwriting, for Ashley on her 30th birthday. I sat cross-legged on the attic floor, the envelope balanced in my hands. My chest tightened as I broke the seal. Inside was a letter and a small brass key. The paper was yellowed at the edges, but her words were clear, written in the graceful loops I had memorized long ago. My dearest Ashley, if you are reading this, you are 30 years old. I may not be there to see it, but I want you to know how deeply you were loved. Your father and I built every part of our lives around giving you the best we could. But love is not only about giving. Love is also about gratitude, responsibility, and sacrifice. One day you will face the truth of that. When you do, I hope you choose to grow. Tears blurred the page, but I kept reading. This key unlocks a safety deposit box at Rocky Mountain Bank. Inside is a small fund I set aside for you. It is not large, but it is meant to help you start something of your own. Your father will know when you are ready to receive it. If you are reading this letter, I trust his judgment. Use it wisely, my sweet girl, and always remember, gratitude turns gifts into love. I let the letter fall into my lap and stared at the key glinting in the weak light. My throat tightened until I could hardly breathe. Sarah had written those words more than 2 decades ago, but it felt as if she were speaking into the room at that very moment. She had known. Somehow she had known what Ashley would need more than anything. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope, then slid the key into my pocket. I carried the chest back down the ladder and into my office. I set the letter on my desk, right beside the ledger of love binder. 2 records of a life, one in numbers and contracts, the other in a mother's handwriting. My phone buzzed just then, a text from Ashley. Dad, the bakery offered me more hours. I'm working the closing shift tomorrow.